Hi, it's David Morrow. Sorry I couldn't be in class, but this is going to be my presentation for Chapter 29 of The Grapes of Wrath. So what I wanted to start off doing was just go into a little summary about the chapter and talk about some of the things that were conveyed by Steinbeck and that he described. So one idea that we had was nature turning against the people. So this was described in the earlier chapters, and it's important to note that because this chapter was definitely a reflection of the earlier chapters, where in the first chapter you see the dust and how that affects the people, but now it's the rain. So what we see is the rain floods the fields and it kills all of the crops, it takes away all of the work, and it really demoralizes all the people in a different way than the dust did. Whereas the dust was dry and arid and it left no room for crops to grow. The rain submerged the crops and it also limited it just in a different way. So this also led to the men growing hungry, hopeless. They were on the brink of breaking, as described in chapter 1, where, the women were watching them. They were trying to read their expressions, see if the men were able to, sustain themselves and hold themselves together. And this chapter really brought them to, like, the breaking point, kind of. They were helpless, starving. There was really nowhere for them to go. Nobody was helping them. But then eventually at the end of the chapter, we see a shift in tone because the rain stops and the pressure of the chapter, it definitely subsides. There's not a lot of tension anymore. There's not that sense of helplessness because there's this grass and it starts to grow, which definitely represents new beginnings. And there's also the aspect that, there's this new wrath and anger that the men have found in themselves that they can use to their advantage. So, as for some of the themes in the book, one of the main themes in this chapter and in the beginning chapters as well was perseverance in the face of adversity. So, this was definitely a heavy topic, and it's really the main reason why Steinbeck chooses to write chapter 29 the way he does to cover this theme, because he wants to prove that, cohesion among groups as well as having an unshakable will, it fosters progression and allows men to grow. That pressure that comes from being in the adversity. So we definitely see the men react and we see their roles shift because of this. And most of that pressure just came from, the sickness that was going on in the chapter they described, pneumonia, measles, all those things. On top of all the starvation that was going on, it was just a lot for them to face and endure as people, so it was definitely hard. And then we have the theme of us versus them mentality between the California residents and the Okies. So what the California people did was made sure that the Okies really couldn't benefit from or get any aid at all, and this was because they were enraged with their presence, just completely not excited to have them there. So that was definitely a theme that was brought up again, and it just goes to show the unwillingness of people despite struggle. Like they weren't willing to help them even though they were on their begging knees, starving and needing food. Some other topics that I feel were important for this chapter was definitely nature. In the first chapter, like I said, they're really just a reflect. This chapter was just a reflection of chapter 1, how they described the dust, and it was just like the rain was a substitute for it, and the rain was acting as a cleanser rather than something that dried things out and killed them that way. So in chapter 1, you hear this quote: the last rains came gently, and they did not cut the scarred earth." So it's just showing the total contrast of these two chapters, even though they are acting as reflections of each other. Because you see in this chapter, it opens and it says, "For 2 days the earth drank the rain until the earth was full." And this is just, I think it's good parallelism in the language. It's good style choice for Steinbeck to use because it really paints a picture of the intensity of the nature and how it really affected the people. And I also think that there were a lot of important parallels between the two chapters in terms of the motifs, like the imagery, the men gathering together. We got that image in the first chapter and we get it here again, and it just kind of shows the developmental shifts and the social roles of the characters, because in the first chapter you see the men and they're nervous and everybody's kind of anxious and they're not really sure what's going to happen, and they are banded together, but not the way they are in this chapter, because they're emotionally hardened by this chapter due to all of the struggle, the constant, being pressed down and forced down by superiors, by the banks, the governments, the companies. All of those people are really just trying to limit their their lives, and they don't even know why, and it's really unfair, and they become emotionally hardened by this and angry by it. And this is kind of where that important quote comes in, where it talks about the wrath. Where's the quote? Let me find it. It says, "And the break would never come as long, and the break would never come as long as fear could turn to wrath." So this was definitely one of the most significant quotes I think of the book, because it just drives in that main point that Steinbeck's trying to show, where anger comes from, like, if you have unity and you have brotherhood and you have all of those things, it's great, but without anger and without that emotion and that raw passion to want more for yourself, you're not really going to be able to achieve anything. So that's definitely something that this chapter brought to the table. Sorry I couldn't be here, and sorry this whole thing was a mess, but whatever. So, okay, bye.